happens with housing. And yes, thank you, Farah, for starting the recording. Again, this is our anti-displacement meeting. We're going to be talking about all things housing. We're going to basically give a recap of everything that happened with housing as far as the city budget, and also some policies that really impact renters, as well as some other development issues that are happening in the city, namely RFK. So lots to talk about. There's been a lot of attacks on renters that are happening simultaneously. So we're going to get into all of that. We're going to talk about what exactly happened, how we organize, and we're also going to plan for the fall. We want to make sure that we're already thinking about how we're going to organize especially when the council comes back from recess this fall, especially in September. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen one more time. They're doing it all in present mode. All righty. So again, welcome. And before we get officially started with all of that packed agenda I just named, I would love for folks to introduce themselves. So I would first love for the staff maybe to introduce themselves. And we also have some wonderful guest speakers that are with us. So I'd love for them to introduce themselves. And then folks continue sharing in the chat your name and your ward or your neighborhood that you're calling from, and an issue that you were concerned about or had been following. So I'll open it up to staff. And again, I'll just kick it off. My name, again, is Andrea. I'm from Empower DC. I'm a community organizer on the housing team.
Hey, my name's Farah, Community Development Director here at Empower DC. Don, go for it.
Hey, how are you, everyone? Name's Don. I'm also part of Empower DC outreach team.
Good evening, everyone. Daniel, the PLO with Empower DC.
Daniel got the Northern Lights going, y'all. So we love it. All right. Well, yes. And folks, I already see that people put information in the chat. I see Ward 6 is in the house. I see Fair Budget's in the house. I see Ward 5, a lot of different folks here. So thank you so much for joining, and please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat. We're going to just keep moving because, again, we do have a packed agenda, but we are so grateful for all of you for being here. So what is that packed agenda exactly? So I'll just talk a little bit about Empower DC. A lot of you might be familiar already, so I'll keep it brief. But then we'll get into a DC budget recap by our guest speaker. Oh, I'm so sorry. I realized I just skipped. I'm sorry. I just skipped our guest speaker. So I am going to pause and let our guest speakers introduce themselves. Mychal, do you want to come off and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Hey, y'all. I'm Mychal Cohen. I'm with the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, and I'm excited to share a lot of bad news with y'all. So sorry.
And we'll also have Amanda Korber from Legal Aid with us, but she'll be on a little closer to her time.
Yes, wonderful guest speakers in the house. And my apologies, Mychal, for skipping over you. Again, thank you everyone for being here. Here's our agenda. So we'll have that DC budget recap by Mychal. Then we'll talk a little bit about some happenings with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. Daniel's going to lead that and get us into some budget stuff there. Then we'll talk about the Rental Act and eviction and TOPA, and Amanda and Farah will lead us in that. Then Mychal will get into the stadium and what's been happening with RFK. And then we'll talk about some ways that folks can take action. We'll have a final Q&A and then close. But we will have periodical pauses throughout the presentation so folks can ask questions. We understand that this is a lot of information about a lot of different topics. So if you have a burning question about a specific topic, we recommend that you write your question in the chat. We'll keep mind of it. And when we have that pause in the presentation, we'll do our best to answer a few folks questions, and then we'll move on, and then we'll do it again for a second time before we do the final Q&A. So, you know, we'll have time to really process this and think together. So, but before we get into all that, just want to ground us in about Empower DC and our work and why this is so important to us. So we are a community organizing group. We were founded in 2003 by our current executive director, Parisa Norozi, and another wonderful longtime activist, Miss Linda Leaks. Our vision is DC is a state where human rights and needs are met, systemic harm is exposed and repaired, and empowered residents shape the decisions that impact their lives. So that's why it was really important for us to show up and show out during all of these decisions that were happening, the budget and all of that. Our mission is to build the power of DC residents through resident-led community organizing to advance racial, economic, and environmental justice. And we do this through several buckets of work. We have our eviction prevention outreach. Shout out to Don for really leading that work. We do door-to-door canvassing to make sure that folks facing eviction have their rights or know their rights, and have resources to fight eviction. We also have our tenant power space. This is a twice-a-month space that we hold virtual and in person. We share information about tenants' rights and options that folks have to protect themselves against eviction and bad housing conditions. We also do leadership development and strategizing to really win improvements that help DC renters. We also do affordable housing preservation. We're organizing with tenants to improve and expand and preserve affordable housing and hold slum landlords accountable. And then we have this wonderful space right here, which is our anti-displacement network. And this is a space for everyone, residents, organizers, advocates, allies, everybody across DC to just really come together and process and respond to big issues, big changes around affordable housing and displacement. So that's why we're here today, to really just process all of these things that happened over the summer. And with that being said, I am going to pass it off to Mychal to kick us off to talk about the budget. And thank you all again for being here with us.
Cool. Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, like I said, you know, buckle up, y'all. I hope you have, you know, the last remaining rays of sunshine shining in on wherever you're calling from. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the budget. So I think as is shown on the screen up here, the council sort of passed the second vote on the proposed FY26 budget, which is the sort of budget for this upcoming year. And so then that piece of legislation will then go to the mayor and then eventually to Congress. And so I will sort of, if we can go ahead in the slides. Actually, can I do that? No. Okay. Yeah, keep one more. Yes. So this is just the framing. So every year, DC goes through a budgetary process. This particular year, if we can go ahead one slide, there are a few sort of really unique pressures facing the budget, which I'll go through really quickly. So the first being that FY25, which is the current fiscal year that we're in, there was a conflict with Congress where they essentially froze around $1 billion in local funds. So this was DC money that, in their passing of the continuing resolution, meant that DC couldn't spend those funds. And so we were facing this sort of budget crisis, which then delayed the actual release of the FY26 budget. Multiple weeks passed when the process usually starts. So that delayed the process and then also made the process go really quickly this year. We also were facing, as you all know, significant threats to our local autonomy, which put pressure on some of the decision makers in the city. We're also facing potential changes to federal programs, some of which I believe Daniel will be talking about. And so those changes to federal programs impact our local budget. And so you saw a lot of council members sort of keeping an eye on these sort of big changes to federal programs. We also saw additional pressures on our own budget. So due to the significant loss of employment at the federal level. There's a projection of almost $1 billion in revenue loss due to that, due to those changes at the federal level. So that's kind of separate from the changes I talked about a few seconds ago. And then we're also seeing there being some proposed changes at the federal level to the taxation, which might require DC to decouple its tax structure from the federal tax structure in order to prevent loss of revenue due to tax cuts at the federal level. So what that all means in practice is that this budget was really tight, and you saw council members really reacting from this kind of fear-based austerity mindset, which meant that a lot of cuts to the programs that we care about. And then the last thing that I will talk about is there was a little bit of conflict between the council and the CFO, which is a chief financial officer's office, about certifying the FY26 budget. So essentially, the council went through and got to before the sort of second vote on the budget, the sort of final vote on the budget, the council had to make an additional $30 million in cuts to certain programs to comply with the CFO's requirement that they keep a certain amount of money in reserve. So essentially what that meant was after this full budget process, there was an additional $30 million in cuts made in order to comply with the CFO. And you saw that impact some of the sort of housing programs that we care about, and I'll talk about in a second. So we go forward. Yep. So before I jump into this, I'm going to be giving you all a lot of numbers. Tragically, as it's the budget, you can't avoid that, but I'll try to go slow and give context where I have it. And then if there are questions that you have about any of these numbers or questions about programs that I don't talk about, definitely feel free to put them in the chat and I'll answer them if I know, and if not, I'll try to get that answer for you at a later date. So the first program that I'm going to talk about is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So essentially, this is a program that folks are able to access when they're facing a financial emergency to help them cover the cost of rent. And so if some of you all have been paying attention to this program, you know that the council already sort of shifted the eligibility requirements for this program. So already starting out, they narrowed the amount of people that could qualify for this really critical assistance program. And then within the budget, we saw the mayor initially fund it at $5 million, which that number is over a $15 million cut from what it was last year. So significant cuts to this program. If you know anything about that program, you know that last year when the application website went live, it was closed same day within a couple of hours. That was the level of need. And we saw that program face a significant cut. The council did add on to that initial 5 million, such that the current funding for ERAP is around 8.6 million. ERAP did get hit by that sort of $30 million cut that I talked about earlier, that last minute change. And so essentially what that means is that ERAP's funded at 8.6 million now, but if there is additional revenue in September, that number will rise back up to 11.5 million. So that's a kind of contingency funding. If there's additional funding, the council has already earmarked some of that to go to ERAP. The last thing that I'll say about ERAP is that we do know that there are still folks from last year who were approved but haven't received funds. So it's also unclear how much of this new funding will actually go to sort of new applicants. So there's already a backlog. So it just kind of shows the level of underfunding the need that we saw in this budget around housing. The next thing that I'll talk about is the Housing Production Trust Fund. I'm excited to talk about this because this is one of the few solid wins that we saw for housing within this current budget. So the mayor funded it at $100 million. And then the council, which is something that they haven't done in the past and we've been pushing for quite a long time, set aside $20 million for preservation of affordable housing. So essentially that means that $20 million were set aside to sort of to preserve the existing affordable housing we have and also to ensure long-term affordability. And then that $20 million also has the potential to rise up to $30 million if there's additional funding in September. Okay, so this is the voucher. There's a few sort of voucher program updates. We asked for additional funding for the local rent supplement program. So essentially this is DC's local version of the housing choice voucher, or Section 8 vouchers, you might know them as. So we asked for additional funding, did not receive any funding as it relates to new local rent supplement program vouchers. Permanent supportive housing vouchers, and these are vouchers for folks who are experiencing homelessness. Was a bit of a mixed bag. We did see additional vouchers funded for families, about 176 total. But we didn't see any additional vouchers for individuals. So if you know anything about sort of the crisis of homelessness that we're facing in the city, you know that we need additional vouchers for individuals. We didn't see any funding for that in this current budget. And a lack of funding there means that people are going to, suffer significant health consequences if they're not housed. Target affordable housing vouchers, which is another sort of type of voucher targeted towards folks who've touched the homelessness services system. So about 160 new vouchers there. And then as it relates to public housing, the mayor's original budget cut about $7 million in capital funding, earmarked for public housing repairs. Additionally, there was $26 million that was earmarked for repairs in FY26. Essentially, they moved out a year. So it was that funding was supposed to be earmarked for this upcoming year. About 26 million of that was pushed out a year, delayed. And so those are some of the key sort of housing and homelessness budget updates. I'll talk about a few things that aren't necessarily sort of other elements that we saw pass through this current budget. We did see a repeal of I-82, essentially the tip minimum wage. We saw a compromise that instead of bringing the tip minimum wage up to meet the full minimum wage, we saw a compromise that tagged that at about 75% of the full minimum wage. We also saw Access to Justice, a program that allows folks to get support in terms of legal support or housing organizing support. That was cut in the mayor's original budget. The council restored about $1.7 million in funding to Access to Justice. We also saw a few significant cuts to really critical early education programs. So essentially, what the mayor did was some of those programs were funded in this current fiscal year, but she cut the long-term funding for these early education programs that we know are really critical for our young people. We also saw a cut of funding to both child tax credits and a sort of baby bond program. Both of these are really proven strategies for reducing the racial wealth gap we saw both of those. We saw the baby bond program get cut entirely, and we saw a significant cut to the child tax credit. And so sort of what all this sort of holistically, if we think about this budget as a whole, we saw really significant cuts to a lot of programs that folks rely on for health, for housing, for education. And I think importantly, we saw a push on the council to raise additional revenue that failed. So essentially, there was an attempt to sort of raise capital gains tax, which is a tax on the wealthiest individuals in the city. We saw that push fail, which means that the council didn't have the will to sort of raise additional revenue to fund some of these key critical programs that folks rely on. So that was a lot of information. I'll stop there and see if there are any sort of questions that folks have about anything I said or programs that I might not have mentioned.
You see the question about the
There's-
capital gains push?
Yeah, there's a question if you can say more about the capital gains tax push.
Yes. So essentially, Councilmember Parker introduced an amendment that would essentially create a capital gains tax. And that tax would have been used to, I don't remember the exact programs that he was attempting to earmark that funding to. But essentially, he introduced the amendment. The amendment failed largely due to a few things: the Chairman Mendelson's opposition to raising additional revenue. I think there was also some concern on the council about introducing this tax now when we know that there's sort of these issues that might be coming up with the federal tax structure that might make it so we have to revisit raising additional revenue. Yeah, I don't know if you have specific questions about. Yes, so the sort of, if you're talking about the $1 billion revenue drop, I see a question. What's the main reason for the revenue drop projected in FY26? Could it rebound and enable us to better fund programs? Yeah, so the big driver behind the sort of projected loss in revenue is the loss in some of the tax revenue from folks from the massive cuts at the federal level in terms of federal jobs. From everything I've heard, there's not an expectation that we're going to see like an immediate rebound from that. But I think September will be the first revenue forecast coming out from the CFO. So that might give us additional insight there.
Any other questions for Mychal, folks? Well, maybe we move on, and if you got a question, you can still put it in the chat. We'll have some other times where we pause. Again, we're going to keep pausing throughout the presentation so folks can process and be able to ask their questions. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. Thank you so much, Mychal, for that recap. And Mychal will come back on a little bit later to talk about the stadium. But for right now, we're going to move on to HUD and what happened there. So I'll bring Daniel on to talk about that. And thank you again, Mychal.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Mychal, for that recap. Good evening, everyone. Daniel, once again, with Empower DC. Just a brief overview of what we know is happening right now with the federal budget as it relates to HUD. So earlier this year, there were some very real concerns about potential cuts to HUD that would hurt tenants living in subsidized housing. Fortunately, the Senate's recently released appropriation bill looks a lot better than what was expected. It is important to note, though, that there's a, ooh, excuse me, I see a typo there. There's just a lot happening with the federal government, as we all know. So although the FY26 budget hasn't been finalized, I think we feel comfortable that once again, the cuts will not be as severe as we had thought, and some of the other concerns that were out there that I'll touch upon here in just a sec aren't there any longer. But we should definitely keep an eye on it. Can I get the next slide? So under the Senate's proposal, HUD would receive $73.3 billion in FY26. This would be an increase of $5.5 billion from what the House is proposing. But, you know, when you're counting billions, I guess it's all relative, right? So fairly close there. The Senate bill increases funding for tenant-based rental assistant contract renewals to 33.97 billion. The House bill only provides level funding, so that's also a good sign, right? That they're not that far off, and that it's not going in the negative. Although this is good, this level would not provide enough funding to continue what is called the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, a HUD program which provides money to local housing authorities to issue emergency housing vouchers. The Senate bill provides $3.2 billion for public housing capital needs, you know, big repairs, the maintenance of their properties and systems. It's a decrease from the FY25 funding, so that's a little bit concerning, but there is funding there. The House proposed a $1.12 billion cut to public housing capital needs in the FY26 spending bill. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how that washes out. The Senate bill also proposes a $5.08 billion for public housing operating costs. This is their day-to-day expenses. A decrease from FY25. The House bill proposes a cut of $501 million for public housing operating costs in FY26 from the previous year's funding. The Senate and the House both provide an increase in funding for project-based rental assistance for FY26. This is interesting to see because we're seeing a lot of that happen here in the district and across the country when it comes to public housing, especially as it gets redeveloped through RAD or Section 18s. And once again, this is kind of high level stuff in a sense. If folks want to talk a little bit more about that, please feel free to follow up with me. But the Senate proposes funding at $17.4 billion, and the House provides a $237 million increase from the FY25 budget. There was a lot of concerns about folks getting only having access to subsidized housing for 2 years. Neither the Senate bill nor the House bill include the Trump administration's proposal to impose an arbitrary and harmful 2-year time limit on receiving HUD rental or homeless assistance. That's what we know right now. We were able to get this information from our colleagues at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They did a great evaluation of that. We'll drop it in the chat in just a little bit if folks are interested in reading a little bit more in depth. But that's where we are right now. We hope that it doesn't affect, obviously the DC Housing Authority, and that folks here are able to maintain their vouchers and that public housing is being invested in. And there's some stuff happening here where the Housing Authority is planning to renovate a significant amount of their portfolio. There's some concerns as well, and we'll be doing some more meetings on that in the future, especially for folks who are public housing residents. One thing to note, I think, with the vouchers is that one big concern, though, is that we should always keep an eye on is the way that the funding levels don't allow for, as people stop using their voucher, right? If somebody stops using their voucher for one reason or another, a lot of those vouchers are just finished there. So they're not refunded and can't be used again. So we're unfortunately losing some vouchers. for the future and for future needs. So a concern that we also need to keep an eye on. But that's it. And feel free, I'll add my email. Feel free to shoot me an email or chat me up with any questions related to this. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Daniel. I'm just taking a quick, okay. They want to put the National Low Income Housing Coalition resource in the chat. Okay, perfect. Just making sure I didn't miss any questions here. It's hard for me to see when I'm sharing the screen, but I'm gonna go ahead and share one more time. If no one has any other questions, burning questions for Daniel right now. Nope. Okay.
Yeah, I was just gonna underscore because Daniel said this, but also we've been saying a lot. It's just I think that you know, we've been hearing like a lot of concerns from folks like, am I going to lose my housing if I'm not working for 2 years? Or is there going to be a new rule? Or are we going to lose these housing programs? And I think, is it fair to say, Daniel, like we feel pretty good right now that like there's not going to be major policy changes and that there's not going to be cuts that will impact people who currently have affordable housing?
That's right. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think we should be wary and keep an eye on it as I mentioned. But right now, you know, I don't think we are nearly as worried as we were a couple months ago when the Senate hadn't approved their appropriations bill.
Yeah, and I think something we heard was that folks in red states did show up, right? That they were calling their Congress members and saying, you know, housing's important, don't cut our housing. So yeah.
Ms. Perkins, I'm gonna share my screen one more time. So I'm gonna keep going because we already did questions. So now I'll pass it off to Amanda. I'm not sure if Amanda was able to, or Farah. Okay, Amanda's here. Great. Oh no, Amanda. Okay, so Farah for. Oh, you're here. Yay. Okay, I'm sorry. Transfer and facilitation, y'all. I'm so I'm so glad to introduce Amanda from Legal Aid DC. So I'm gonna pass it off to you to talk about the Rental Act and eviction.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you for having me. My name is Amanda. I am a lawyer at Legal Aid. I've been doing eviction defense work since 2015. I want to talk to you a little bit today about the eviction portions of the Rental Act. Kind of big picture, the Rental Act is, as many of you probably know, a giant bill that the mayor introduced that addresses and changes the law in mostly all bad ways for tenants across many bills, across many areas. And now it's making its way through the council. And I'm going to only talk about the changes that the bill would make to the eviction space. I know Farah is going to talk after me and talk a bit about the changes it would make to the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So we are very concerned about basically every single thing that is in the Rental Act as it relates to eviction. Kind of big picture, obviously we aren't in the room when landlords are talking to council and the mayor, but our understanding is a lot of the proposed changes come from complaints from the landlord that it is taking too long to evict people in the district. And that people aren't paying their rent and it's taking too long to evict them. And oh my gosh, and the council is and the mayor are reacting to that and listening to those stories. And what we get as a result of that is the eviction provisions in the Rental Act. And it would be impossible because there are so many changes that have the intent of trying to speed up evicting people. That it would be impossible to go through all of them. So I will just spend a little time sort of talking about the ones that are most concerning to me and to other lawyers who have been working in eviction defense for a number of years. So there's one category.
Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
Andrea, if you just click it over to the next slide, we can just take some notes on some of the really big points that Amanda's saying.
Cool. So the first big picture thing, and yes, I'm sorry, I didn't have a chance to put together any slides before tonight. I'm very sorry. But one of the kind of buckets of things is there are a few ways that the council is trying to speed up the timelines for eviction. So currently right now, tenants are entitled to a 30-day notice of non-payment of rent before they get sued for eviction. And the current bill that the council is considering would reduce that down to a 20-day notice of a 20-day notice before getting sued for non-payment of rent. So cutting off 10 days where people could try to catch up before being sued, see if they can find assistance, that sort of thing. It also is reducing the number of days between when a landlord would have to serve the tenant with the complaint and when the initial hearing is. So right now, a landlord is required to serve a tenant with the complaint of their eviction 30 days before their first court hearing. Now, I should say, if this bill passes in its current form, they would only have to give 14 days notice. And as you all, I'm sure, like that's just simply not enough time for people to take off work, line up childcare, figure out the logistics of making sure that they can appear in court and defend themselves. Prior to the pandemic, tenants used to only get 7 days notice, which was super wild. And what we saw when that was the case was just tons and tons of tenants losing their cases by default. And then when it was increased to 30 days, which is the law right now, the number of tenants who default just drastically dropped because people are actually able to plan to appear and defend themselves in court against eviction. And so while 14 days is better than the pre-pandemic 7 days, we are very worried that we are going to kind of see a big increase again in people losing their cases and being evicted just because they defaulted and didn't have the opportunity to appear and defend themselves. Then there's another kind of bucket of changes that has to do with giving the court more discretion to basically not require landlords to follow all the rules when filing eviction cases. So right now, there are a couple of places in the law where it says that the court has to dismiss the case if the landlord doesn't meet certain requirements before filing for eviction. So for example, having to serve a 30-day notice to cure or quit, telling the tenants what they're doing wrong and how they might fix it so they can avoid eviction, making sure the landlords actually wait the 30 days before filing, making sure that if the tenant speaks a language other than English and the landlord knows that, and it's one of the common languages in DC, the notice is served in that language so the tenant can actually read it. And right now, if the landlord doesn't do these things, the case has to be dismissed. And the law that they're trying to change it to says the court can dismiss it if the landlord doesn't do these things, but has discretion not to. And that's a big concern to us because what the council is saying is we just want the court to not dismiss cases if the landlord doesn't meet technicalities. But the council isn't defining technicalities. And right, what's a technicality to a landlord is very often not a technicality to a tenant or to me. And so that is a really big concern to us, to kind of water down these notice provisions that have been in DC law for decades. These aren't I think a lot of the framing is, these are COVID protections and we're just taking them back. These aren't COVID protections. These are protections tenants have had in the District of Columbia since good cause eviction was first instituted over 40 years ago. And we're talking about paring all of that back because landlords are complaining about not being able to evict people fast enough. So that's another area of very big concern. And I'm sorry if I'm going too long. Please, somebody stop me if I am. The last thing I want to touch on two more big changes. So one has to do with what's been in the news a lot of public safety evictions. And what this does is create very expedited timelines if a landlord is accusing a tenant of committing certain crimes. And so we're not talking about a tenant was arrested and convicted of a crime. We're talking about a landlord thinks a tenant committed a crime, And if they allege a tenant committed certain dangerous crimes, they only have to give the tenant 10 days notice before suing them for eviction. And then if a judge agrees with them that a tenant committed these crimes, the whole family, even if only one tenant committed the alleged crime, can be evicted. That is obviously, I think it's pretty evident the many horrific things that can go wrong in that process and why having such an expedited timeline is a real problem, why evicting an entire family for one person's alleged conduct is a real problem. This is very similar to what has existed in federally subsidized housing for many decades called, you'll often hear it referred to as federal one strike law, which is one strike, you're out, you commit one crime, you're out. And we've been seeing those cases for a long time. And right, what we see is like families torn out of their communities because somebody allegedly committed a crime. Entire families displaced, fabric of communities sort of tattered because of landlords sort of acting as mini prosecutors, evicting families when they allege that a crime has occurred. And it's really disturbing to me personally that what I've always thought of as a horrible federal law that we have to deal with in federally subsidized properties, DC now wants to say, we're going to have our own little local version for all tenants. When we should have learned the opposite lesson, we're implementing it for like on our local level by choice. So that's really just disturbing to me and kind of a suggestion that we're going in the complete wrong direction. And then the final thing I will talk about is protective orders. Protective orders are things in non-payment of rent cases. So if a person is sued for non-payment of rent, a landlord can ask for a protective order while a tenant defends themselves. And what that means is a court can order the tenant to pay their rent to the court while the case is pending. Currently, when that happens, a tenant can say, actually, I've been living with really bad housing conditions. And so, sure, I'll pay my rent to the court, but we need to have a hearing where I can tell you about what I'm living with so you can reduce my rent appropriately and make sure that order for me to pay actually reflects the real value of my house, given the conditions I'm living in. And then, after hearing the tenant, the judge decides, okay, maybe your rent's $1,000, but your conditions are horrific. So I'm going to reduce that by 50% and say you only have to pay $500 a month into the court in order to keep this case going. And what the council's bill is going to do is say that when the landlord requests that protective order, the court has to enter a protective order for the full amount of the rent. And then only later, at a later date, after the order is already entered, the tenant can have a hearing where they present their defenses and the judge then can reduce it. But the problem with this sort of backwards approach of having the order entered before hearing the defendant is if a defendant misses if a tenant misses one of these payments, it's a court order. So the landlord will ask for and the court can enter sanctions. A sanction can be as bad as losing your case because you missed a payment. So if the court enters the full amount of the rent and the tenant misses a payment before they have the opportunity to come back to court and tell the court how bad their conditions are, we can have a situation where a tenant is being sanctioned and loses their case before ever having the opportunity to tell the court what they've been living with. And this just, right, like, I don't know. I don't even know how to express how backwards and wrong this is, right? To do this to tenants, to risk tenants losing their home before ever having the opportunity to tell a court the conditions they're living with. So I will stop there. There is some more stuff in the bill, but I think I really have hit on like the worst stuff in there. I'm really hopeful, I want to be hopeful that we can get the council to consider some amendments to the bill before it goes and passes second vote. I know that there are council members like Councilmember Louis George and Councilmember Nadeau who are interested in improving and taking out some of these really bad eviction protections. But I think, to be totally honest, I think they need to hear from more people that they want that these are a problem. More people care about these things and that their constituents want them out of the bill. And so, I'm hoping between now and second vote in the middle of September, we can really put the pressure on them to let people know that like, they're not going to slip this through without people noticing. Like, we know it's in there and they need to change it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amanda. And we'll be talking later in the meeting about some of those opportunities that we'll have for y'all to talk to the council. So I'm going to talk about the Rental Act and the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So as Amanda said, the Rental Act is this huge bill. It covers a lot of different things. Two of the biggest pieces are eviction and then this rewrite of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. So again, we've had one vote. I'm going to talk about what's in the bill, and there'll be a second vote on September 17th. So we do have a chance to make some changes. go ahead and I'll go through each of these. So I just want to say, maybe let me know in the chat if you're somebody who has experienced, who has used the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. It's what we often call TOPA. And what happens in TOPA is that when your building goes up for sale, and currently I will say TOPA applies to almost all housing with 2 or more units. So the only exemption now is for housing in a small area of downtown that's like brand new, expensive housing that probably none of us here live in. But basically it applies to almost all housing. And it says that when the owner wants to sell, they have to give the tenants an opportunity to either match that price, or they can, well, basically to match the price, and the tenants can either buy the property themselves or choose a new owner. And so that's what we're talking about when we say tenants exercise their TOPA rights. So tenants will get an offer of sale. It says, you know, I, Farah, want to sell my building to Andrea for $100. And tenants would decide, do we want to do something to decide the fate of our building? So they could form a tenant association and then decide, try to get that money. Usually in low income buildings, tenants will form a co-op, and that's a picture of tenants who did that. Or we'll say, you know what, we don't really want to own or run a building, so we're going to look for a new buyer. And that gives us the opportunity to choose a new buyer who's going to do things that we want to see, like help it, you know, get better repairs, help keep the building affordable, lower folks' rents, that kind of thing, add more family size units. And if you can go forward, Andrea. So what we know, so TOPA's, you know, existed since 1980. We have a lot of information on what's happened through TOPA. What we know is that through TOPA, tenants consistently negotiate for better housing. They consistently preserve affordable housing and ensure renovations. Through this process of tenants negotiating with a potential landlord and then choosing who's going to buy the building is how we usually get repairs to our old rental housing in DC. It's pretty rare, right, that an owner's going to come in and be like, you know what, I'm just going to fix this place up for y'all. No, the tenants need to actually have a contract that says that. The other time that happens is when there's actually a subsidy, when there's money being added to the affordable housing and it includes a renovation, and that also happens usually because of TOPA. So any exemptions to subsidize to affordable housing is going to remove the ability of tenants to negotiate these really good deals that we've seen. And that's what the Rental Act does. The Rental Act says, actually, you can go forward. I think I probably have this. Okay, I'll say a little more. But the Rental Act is going to say that in affordable buildings, tenants will not have the right to exercise their TOPA rights. And affordability is defined very broadly. So we can see here, this is just during a 15-year period that through tenant purchase, tenants negotiated to add low-income housing tax credits, to maintain rent control and usually get repairs, to get trust fund funding, which keeps the building as affordable. They negotiated to maintain project-based Section 8, and we have not ever lost any subsidized housing through TOPA. So Robert White has been saying, I want to make these changes so that TOPA works for affordable housing. TOPA does work for affordable housing. TOPA is how we get most of our affordable housing. So that's not true. That's not why you would make changes to TOPA. And unfortunately, the changes that he's proposing will actually mean that we'll lose affordable housing and we'll lose real opportunities. So what the bill that passed currently says, and I should say, Councilmember Fruman introduced an amendment to get rid of this exemption, and he had a good amount of support. So 6 council members voted with Councilmember Fruman, and 6 voted against him. So as you know, we should really have 13 council members in DC, and I only named 12, right? But Councilmember Trayon White from Ward 8 will be back for the second vote. And so we hope that during this time period, we can both, get Councilmember White on board with getting rid of this exemption, and also hopefully move over some other council members. What we heard a lot was that council members just didn't understand TOPA and didn't understand this legislation. So we really need to do the work to make sure that they understand that this affordable housing exemption actually hurts affordable housing. So what it says is that if the buyer can say that they'll keep at least half of the apartments affordable to people earning 80% AMI or less, they don't have to go through TOPA. So in the case where I'm selling my building to Andrea, Andrea, might look at this chart. This is what 80% AMI rents are, and be like, you know what? Yeah, I'll sign a contract saying I'll keep rents for a 1-bedroom under $2,030 at half the units. I can keep rents under $2,430 at half the units for 2 bedrooms, because that's not even what a lot of apartments go for in DC. That's not actually affordable. So it'll be really easy to say, sure, I'll do this thing, and then not have to do TOPA. And even if Andrea in this case was a great affordable, which she would be, right? She'd be a lovely affordable housing owner. And she says, you know what, I'm going to keep this building really affordable. That's great, but there may be things that she doesn't know about the building that, of course, tenants would know. So when the tenants actually get involved in the process, they might say, yeah, that sounds good, but we also need family size units because a lot of us are living in apartments that are too small. Or did you know that we don't have hot water a lot of times? We need that. We want that in the contract. So we're missing that ability to negotiate a better deal. And this is just an example of one of those deals. This is in Ward 8, Belmont Crossing. It has a new name, but basically through tenant purchase, the tenants negotiated for a whole bunch of new affordable housing. They lived in the Stanford Capitol building, which y'all might be familiar with. Very poor housing conditions, really run down. And through the TOPA process, they negotiated to go from 275 to actually it's going to be, I think, over 500 units, all below 80% AMI. So they're actually going to be affordable. They're going to have like community, a playground and a park and different things that the community needed. And they're actually going to also have permanent supportive housing for folks who are leaving homelessness. So it's a really great project. And a lot of it came out of like that tenant negotiation. And this project would have been exempt because it was already considered affordable housing. Let's see so I'll just say there's some other stuff in this bill that changes TOPA. I didn't go through all of it, but one thing it does is exempts newer properties. So currently it'll say any property built within the last 15 years would be exempt from TOPA. We know that some newer properties have issues and really do need these TOPA rights. And it also changes what tenants can negotiate. So actually some of the things that were negotiated at Belmont Crossing, like family size units or more affordable housing, tenant services, actually would be prohibited under the law, which is pretty strange. It doesn't make a lot of sense why you would outlaw those things, but I think it goes back to the council not fully understanding the ways that TOPA has been used. So let's see. Let me see if there's anything in the chat, but I did want to say not a done deal. So we are going to be advocating around these to get a better rental act. And so let's see. Somebody asked, in terms of calculating max housing costs, is that based on? I don't. What is the other thing? Somebody just asked, does this include utilities? I think it does just include rent. But I will say, as a lot of us who, know housing, like y'all, people like me who have worked on tenant purchase, like when we look at it, we have a lot of questions, like, how would that work? Who decides this or that? And I think what we saw is this was a really rushed process. So, as Amanda talked about with the Rental Act too, like there's these pieces of the bill that like are written not clearly, don't do what folks are saying they should do. And I think the problem is they didn't really talk to the folks who know, what things look like on the ground. Yeah, so I don't know, Laura, like it depends how that utility is calculated. And that's a great point, right? They're probably not taking all of those things into account. Other questions on the Rental Act? Eviction or tenant purchase? All right, so it was a big month at the City Council. They talked about the budget. They talked about the Rental Act, and they also made this huge multi-billion-dollar deal around the stadium. So we're going to ask Mychal to come back on and tell us a little about that.
And I'm sorry, quickly, I did see in the chat someone was asking about like the if there was like a script for calling the council members to talk about the Rental Act. We I think we're gonna make an updated version of this because we had one like ahead before the first vote. So we're gonna make an updated version and we'll put it in the chat for you, okay? So or we'll
Yeah, I
send
will say to Kendall's point, you can skip Nadeau and Louis George. They've both been really good on these bills, and but I would say, so I would say you can skip them. You can call Fruman about eviction, but he's been good on TOPA. And yeah, we'll send out that information. I would focus on Mendelson. He's an important vote, and he's been kind of in between on some of these issues. And if he votes a certain way, he brings other council members with him. So if you're going to call one person, and Amanda's seconding that, so that's good to hear. If you're going to call one person, I would call the chair.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
Thanks.
We got
Yeah, that was a great question. And
All
we can send that with our follow-up information. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, let me share my screen so we can get Mychal back on here. Give me 1 second. And so glad everyone's ready to take action already. I think we'll come back to the council walk around. So yeah, let's just talk about the stadium first.
All right, go ahead, Mychal.
Yes, we always be thinking the same way. I think they might be muted.
Oh, you can't unmute. I'm so sorry. I can.
Oh,
Sorry, we were having some issues, and so I changed it and forgot. Thank you. Probably.
Cool.
Sorry about that, Mychal.
Wow, fair trying to silence me.
Everybody,
yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, so I'm back again. Given what I just said about all the cuts in the budget, I'm sure everyone is really excited about the concept of spending $1.1 billion to subsidize the stadium. As was mentioned before, the council, in the midst of also the Rental Act and the budget, also passed the first vote, paving the way for the redevelopment of the RFK Stadium site. As you can sort of see the breakdown on this slide between the value of the land, waived property taxes, redirected sales taxes. It all sort of accounts to about $1.1 billion in FY26 funding going to subsidize the stadium. And depending on the estimate you look at, between $6 to $8 billion over the lifetime of this 30-year deal. So if we go forward a little bit, I'll sort of talk a little bit about how we got to this point. So earlier, I believe last year, the Congress released the control of the site over to DC. With DC gaining control of the RFK site, the mayor began to sort of negotiate and eventually struck a deal with the commander's owner, Josh Harris, who I think it's important to point out is worth an estimated $12.2 billion, to bring the commanders to RFK Stadium. The original deal that the mayor struck included about $1.1 billion of funding, direct funding, and then over the lifetime of the deal, as I said, depending on the estimate, somewhere between $6 and $8 billion. The original sort of timeline that the mayor set out had the council voting on it by July 15th. And essentially what that tells you is that it was a really rushed process, right? The the mayor sort of struck this deal without any input and then set this really ridiculous timeline for the council to vote on the budget, or to vote on RFK. So moving forward, the council detached the RFK process from the budget, which made a lot of sense, but crucially, they left in the mayor's placeholders, that $1.1 billion. They left that in the budget so that it could be funded. The council, primarily the chair, Chairman Mendelson, negotiated directly with the team, pushing the timeline out multiple weeks beyond the mayor's original July 15 deadline, which again highlights the sort of false urgency that has kind of characterized this this process from the start. There weren't any other proposals considered, any other options considered for the site, despite evidence that there were other alternative options that would have provided more tax revenue to the city, provided more housing, provided more opportunities for small businesses. None of that was really considered in this process. And so the council, so if we go back, sorry, just the last point, the council held public hearings on July 28th and then did agency hearings on the 29th. However, importantly, details of the New Deal started to leak even before those public hearings took place, sort of calling in to question, what were they actually, what was the actual input that the public had into this process? So if we go forward, one slide. And so the council sort of passed the first vote in support of the sort of revised deal with the commanders. The new deal has some marginal improvements. The original deal had the team taking the entirety of the revenue from parking. The new deal, DC is able to levy a tax on some of the parking revenue. The commanders agreed to some labor agreements that brought on some of the more progressive members of the council to vote for the new stadium deal. However, the deal still includes, as I said, that $1.1 billion in short-term subsidies for the commanders, and it still has that $6 to $8 billion price tag over the course of 30 years. The new deal, if we go forward one more, the new deal is still really bad for DC. Analysis by the chief financial officer showed that the team didn't actually need the tax abatements to make the construction pencil out. They didn't actually need the funding from the city in order to make the deal work. The mayor has sort of put forth this claim that the subsidy for RFK is relatively small compared with other stadium deals, but that's only true because the stadium that they're planning is one of the most expensive ever proposed. And then finally, as I said before, the FY26 budget was characterized by significant cuts to housing, to healthcare, to education. All this was happening at the same time that this sort of significant billions of dollars of subsidy given to a billionaire kind of operating at the same time as they're telling, residents of DC that there's no funding available for any of their needs. So that's where the stadium deal is. There's still a second vote. There's some issues that they're still hashing out in terms of, potential clawbacks if the team doesn't meet some of their stated goals in terms of housing development. But from my understanding, the deal is it's got a lot of momentum and is likely to pass.
Thank you so much, Mychal, for that summary about the stadium. Whew, y'all, it's a lot of stuff happening at once. It really is. And it just keeps going, and we haven't even gotten to the fall yet. I do want to pause one more time to just open it up for any questions from Mychal or for any of our other speakers before we move on to some action steps for the fall.
I was just wondering, Mychal, if you've heard if there are any pieces of the stadium deal where folks are still trying to, you know, to get changes where we feel like there might be a possibility. Or, you know, if there's anybody on the call who has an idea too, feel free to put it in the chat. Do I have to unmute you again? There we go.
Yeah. So I asked about this for that exact question for the call. From my understanding, there isn't sort of a big push for any sort of last minute changes. But yeah, I definitely happy to if anyone else has any sort of thoughts or things they've heard.
Yeah, just, you know, Nathan saying in the chat, it's going to really affect the residents of DC. Right. And we, you know, we know a lot of folks want the commanders back, right? But at what cost, I think, is the question. And, you know, there's a lot of talk that potentially the commanders could come back without any cost from the district, right? Yeah, so Kendall said, organize and mobilize in your local community. We need more community input. Sorry, I couldn't see that. Oh, yeah, to demand more affordable housing, for sure. For sure.
And you're right on track.
Yes, thank
where
you.
we were headed. Like, and go ahead, Farrah, you want to do it? It's okay.
No, I was just saying the same thing, but thank you. That was a good transition. Yes. Yeah, and affordable housing in particular. I think, you know, we keep talking about it, and we definitely have a lot to talk about either way, with the rental act, with evictions, with tenant purchase. And we can talk about that the stadium needs to be a better deal for residents, at the very least, right, to hold these folks accountable so they know we're paying attention.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's key. And that's something Amanda also emphasized earlier, that a lot of this stuff was happening. And I mean, there was definitely a presence, but I mean, you know, there was a strong landlord lobby that had been in the Wilson building since even before, like last year. Like a lot of these moves started last year to really limit tenants' rights, to start thinking about slashing, you know, key programs. So it's really important to be sharing your story, to be taking action around these issues, and making sure that we're reminding the decision makers, the council members, about our priorities, and that they need to stand with DC residents who vote them in. So we definitely want to talk about some action steps for the fall. As you heard from all of our speakers, there's a lot of key votes happening in the fall. One in particular is the September the 17th. There is going to be the second vote on the Rental Act, and also the stadium. So it's really important for folks to come out and really tune into that. But even beforehand, we need to start that work early. So we want to have some council walkarounds. We plan to have them on September the 9th, and we'll send out the information for it. But really, the point of going to these walkarounds is to be in the Wilson building where these decisions are being made, to really emphasize our priorities, to ask questions, get the tea on what's been happening, what conversations have been happening behind the scenes. And also, the most important thing, getting that direct experience right in front of council members. So that's why we really need the community to come out, share your story, and to share how these different decisions that are happening all at the same time have a real impact, as Nathan just said, on DC residents. And so we definitely encourage you to connect with us, join us as a member, and join our other spaces like Tenant Power, Public Housing Power, Housing Choice Voucher Power, so we can get you up to speed on all of our priorities, and really be able to advocate together and organize together. So these are just some tips and tricks, but we'll walk you through all of that when we go to the council tours. We'll have some handouts for folks to really emphasize our key points. And really, it's just about showing that power, and showing that, really showing that direct experience, and really countering those narratives that not only the landlords who have been lobbying in the Wilson building have been saying about people just don't want to pay, and we need to go and take back these pandemic era protections and blah, blah, blah. But also things that the very council members themselves are saying, just like we heard about Robert White's misconceptions with TOPA, for example. So it's really important to show up and show out. So here is just a rundown. We're going to be busy in September, y'all. This is just a rundown of everything that is happening. And don't worry, don't have to scribble it all down right now. We will definitely send you tons of reminders and updates. The best way to stay in touch with us, though, and stay involved here is to join us as an Empower DC member. And if you are interested in joining us as a member, it's free of cost. We just want you to join like 1 to 2 events per month to just organize with us. And we have tons of events coming up for you to do that. So if you are interested, type your name and member in the chat. We can connect with you and make sure that you can join us as a member, and we can walk you through that process. We also have, as you can see, I'm going to just go back to the very top. September 17th is a very packed day, y'all. So as you see, there's a lot of things happening on that day. We will, the Rental Act and Stadium vote will take place on that day. So we'll be tuning in. And when we ask folks to tune in as well. And also on that very same day in the evening at Anacostia Library, 6 o'clock p.m. Again, we'll send all the information out. We will have a tenant power campaign. And this really is to prep people for a meeting that we're going to have later in the month with a government agency, the Department of Buildings, who is really in charge of housing conditions, inspections, and enforcement. So I know we didn't talk a lot about that today, but again, this is a space we want tenants to be in, because landlords have been meeting with DOB regularly. So again, it's all about making sure that tenants have the opportunity to share their voice and to be in the room with folks who shape a lot of the programs and resources that tenants interact with. So if you want to learn more about that, you can connect with me. We also, again, have those council walkarounds before the Rental Act in the Stadium. That will be, we're thinking September 9th, but early September, we'll update you, if that date changes. And then we also encourage folks, if you aren't able to join us in person for any of those events, we would love for you to share your story on video and tell the council to protect tenants. There's so many attacks right now. We need as much direct experience in front of the council members as possible. So if you need some assistance with that, we are happy to hop on a Zoom with you to go visit you in person at your house. We'll bring that camcorder, we'll bring that microphone, and we'll make sure that that story gets before the council. And I do want to shout out, I see a lot of folks in the room that have already shared their story. So I want to thank y'all for being here and for sharing your story. So again, if you have any questions about those actions or you want to get involved, you can contact me. My information is here on the bottom. So definitely reach out. And I would love to hear in the chat. I saw some people talking about actions already. But if you have an action that you're really excited about, definitely share it so I can make sure to know that you're going to be there that day with us. So thank you all again. I'm going to open it up for any last questions or comments. And before I do that, I just want to thank the guest speakers for joining us. Thank you, Mychal. Thank you, Amanda, who might have hopped off already, but we thank her. And also thank you, Farah and Daniel, for your summaries as well. All right, I'll open it up for questions and final comments, y'all. Ooh, I see a lot of affordable housing is important. Sorry, I'm just catching up with the chat.
Yeah, and I did update it, so now folks can come off mute. Just wanted to get through the final presentations. Yeah, thank you all for participating, and we are gonna, we'll send this out, and we'll send out those next steps on how you can register.
Yes, thank y'all so much. Oh, go ahead, Ms. Perkins, and we'll go ahead and we can stop the recording now. I think it's
Thanks. Okay.
I think all services is important for all. It doesn't matter where you're from.